The morning sun glimmered over the gates of the Virginia Naval Base, casting long shadows across the asphalt. A light breeze carried the faint smell of salt from the nearby harbor. A woman approached, duffel bags slung over her shoulder, moving with a quiet but unmistakable confidence. Her jeans were simple, her jacket plain, but there was something in her gait, precise, measured, that made her seem aware of every detail around her. The two young gate guards, still fresh out of boot camp, spotted her almost immediately. One of them stepped forward, hand resting on the holster of his service pistol. "Ma'am, you can't enter," he said, voice sharp but betraying a hint of uncertainty. He had seen plenty of visitors before, contractors, family members, maintenance crews, but something about this woman made him hesitate. She stopped a few feet away, her calm eyes meeting his. "I understand your procedure," she said softly, "but I am Commander Elena Walker. I've been assigned as the new commanding officer of this base." Her voice carried authority, but it wasn't loud or demanding. It was steady, like the quiet pull of gravity. The guard's jaw tightened. He fumbled with his radio, calling in for verification. Sarge? We've got a visitor." She says she's Commander Walker." Static crackled over the speaker. His partner glanced nervously at him, then back at the woman. A bead of sweat ran down his temple. Commander Walker didn't flinch. She had seen this before, the disbelief, the hesitation, the subtle underestimation. She remembered when she first reported for duty at this very base, years ago, and how easily people assumed she was just another administrative assistant. At the time, it had stung, but she had learned to let results speak louder than words. And results, she knew, were about to speak loudly. Minutes passed. The sergeant arrived, jogging toward the gate in a flurry, uniform perfectly pressed despite the morning's chill. He was older, graying at the temples, and his face twisted into a mixture of confusion and embarrassment as he recognized her. "Commander Walker?" he asked, nearly out of breath. I didn't realize." "Good morning, Sergeant," Elena said, her tone even unshaken. "At ease. I'm here to start my tour of the base." She lifted her bag slightly in a gesture that was casual but deliberate, signaling that she was not here to argue or to coddle anyone. The two young guards exchanged glances, shame flashing across their faces. Only yesterday, they would have laughed at a woman approaching them in jeans, thinking she didn't belong here. Today, they stood frozen, saluting automatically as she stepped through the gate. As she walked onto the base, the early morning hum of generators and distant engines filled the air. The buildings seemed smaller somehow, as if time had rearranged them around her absence. Memories surged, of her first tour, of endless paperwork, of quiet, unnoticed sacrifices. And then of Afghanistan. She remembered Coast Pass like it was yesterday. A convoy ambushed in the narrow, dusty gorge. Radios dead, bullets slicing the air, chaos everywhere. Her commanding officer panicked, shouting orders that made no sense. Without hesitation, Elena had taken charge, coordinating air support, redirecting convoys, and saving nearly 30 lives. Yet when medals were handed out, she had been overlooked, dismissed quietly because she was a woman. Shaking the memories away, she refocused on the present. This base, her new command, would be different. She would leave no room for doubt, no space for mediocrity, and no place for bias. But first, she had to understand what she was walking into. The officers' quarters loomed ahead, familiar yet changed. She could already sense the tension in the air, the whispers, the stares, the subtle questioning of her authority. Men who had never served under her would judge her before knowing her. She had seen it before, in every assignment, in every hall of power. It was predictable. It was temporary. Walking past the drill yard, she noticed a group of new recruits, fumbling through their exercises. Their movements were sloppy, the result of nerves and inexperience. Elena's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. Discipline and precision weren't just military requirements. They were lifelines. And if she had to rebuild this base from the ground up to instill that, she would. Her first stop was the officers' mess. The smell of coffee and breakfast filled the room. She paused at the door, observing the scene. Conversations halted briefly, eyes flicked toward her. Some faces held recognition, others skepticism. The base had forgotten her, but she had not forgotten the base. Every inefficiency, every overlooked policy, every crack in morale would be hers to address. And she would do it quietly, methodically, with the kind of patience only a soldier hardened by war could possess. One officer, Lieutenant Daniels, whispered to a colleague, "Is that?" His voice trailed off as Elena entered. She nodded politely, acknowledging them without breaking stride. She knew their skepticism wasn't personal. It was conditioned. She would earn their respect, one decision at a time, and by the time they realized it, it would be too late to doubt her authority. She reached the command center and paused, running her hand over the edge of the desk. This room had seen years of orders, of missions planned and executed. Soon, her fingerprints would mark it not just as a place of work, but as a hub of efficiency, discipline, and leadership. She turned toward the map on the wall, tracing lines of past operations. Strategy, she reminded herself, was everything. Not ego, not rank, results. Her phone buzzed. A message from her old mentor, now retired, appeared. "They'll test you. Hard. Don't flinch." She smiled faintly. She hadn't flinched before, and she wasn't about to start now. Every test, every doubt, every underestimation was an opportunity. And Elena Walker had always thrived on opportunities others thought impossible. Stepping outside again, she surveyed the base from the central courtyard. Soldiers moved with mechanical precision, unaware of how soon that would change. She adjusted the strap of her duffel bag and squared her shoulders. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the gates she had once been denied. Today, she walked past them not as a visitor, not as a subordinate, but as the commanding officer. And everyone on the base, even the young guards who had doubted her mere presence, would learn, sooner rather than later, who she truly was. As she headed toward her first official briefing, the morning air felt electric. A subtle wind tugged at her hair, carrying with it the promise of challenge, the inevitability of scrutiny, and the thrill of command. Elena Walker was here to lead, not with shouting or fear, but with unwavering confidence. And the base, whether ready or not, would follow. The evening sun cast long shadows over the base as Elena Walker settled into her quarters. The walls were bare, functional, but she didn't care about decoration. Her mind drifted thousands of miles away to the mountains of Afghanistan, where the air was thin, dry, and charged with tension. She closed her eyes, and suddenly she was back in Coast Pass. She remembered the convoy, a long line of armored vehicles winding through narrow rocky gorges, engines straining against the grade, dust choking the air. Her unit had been moving cautiously, intelligence reports suggesting only minor insurgent activity. But then it happened. Explosions tore through the rear of the convoy. Gunfire erupted from hidden positions along the cliffs. Chaos claimed the narrow pass. Soldiers scrambled for cover, shouting over the roar of engines and the screams of the wounded. Elena didn't panic. She never had. Adrenaline sharpened her senses. She quickly assessed the situation. Communications were down, the convoy commander had been hit, and the rear vehicles were immobilized. Every instinct to hold her lives depended on immediate, decisive action. Without hesitation, she climbed into a Humvee, grabbing a radio handset that still worked. Her voice, calm yet commanding, cut through the panic. Alpha section, flank left. Bravo, cover the rear. Charlie, coordinate air support. Keep the wounded secure. Move now. Her commands were precise, each one measured with a strategist's mind. Soldiers who had panicked moments ago obeyed, their confusion replaced by focus. Minutes felt like hours. Rockets screamed past. The ground shook with explosions. Elena coordinated medevac helicopters, directing them to landing zones under fire. She guided her unit's countermaneuvers, repositioning vehicles for cover, ensuring wounded soldiers were evacuated safely. Every decision mattered. One misstep could mean death. But she didn't falter. By the time the dust settled, nearly 30 soldiers had survived an ambush that could have wiped out the entire convoy. She had led, protected, and saved lives in a situation where most officers would have frozen or panicked. But recognition did not come as naturally as survival had. Weeks later, awards were distributed for valor and service. Her name was conspicuously absent. Women weren't combat leaders, her superiors said in quiet tones, assuming she would accept it without objection. And she did, not out of submission, but because she understood that her work wasn't about accolades. Her satisfaction came from knowing every life she had saved, every decision that had made a difference. She had learned the hard way that leadership was about more than rank or recognition. It was about courage, discipline, and the ability to make impossible decisions calmly under pressure. The experience had tempered her like steel forged in fire. She returned home stronger, more disciplined, and more determined than ever to lead where she was needed, regardless of the obstacles. Back at the base in Virginia, Elena walked slowly through the corridors of her new command, recalling her Afghan experience with acute clarity. Every inefficiency, every miscommunication, every hesitation she had witnessed there now seemed like a lesson. She could see how small errors in procedure could escalate into chaos, and she intended to prevent that at this base. Her quarters, though quiet, became a space for reflection and planning. She pulled out maps, documents, and reports from her previous assignments, noting patterns and weaknesses. Each night, she mapped out strategies for improving base operations, refining training protocols, and ensuring her personnel were ready for anything. She knew that a military base, like a convoy in hostile territory, thrived on preparedness, discipline, and coordination. But it wasn't just about operations. Elena remembered the young soldiers she had led in Afghanistan, some of whom had been reluctant, scared, or doubtful of their own abilities. Leadership, she realized, was also about cultivating confidence in others. It wasn't enough to be competent herself. She had to inspire the same precision, calm, and decisiveness in every officer and enlisted member under her command. Her mind returned to specific faces from that deployment. Lieutenant Harris, who had frozen during the first volley of fire. Sergeant Lopez, who had questioned orders mid-ambush. Private Jenkins, terrified, but trying to help the wounded. She remembered how she had guided them, not with anger or blame, but with clear instructions and calm assurance. By the end of the crisis, they had all performed with competence far beyond what she had expected. That was leadership, teaching people to rise to the occasion when the stakes were highest. Elena's reflection was interrupted by the hum of the base's intercom. A morning announcement reminded officers of the day's schedule: drills, briefings, inspections. It was mundane compared to a life-or-death scenario in Afghanistan, but the stakes were still real. Mistakes here could cost efficiency, morale, and readiness. The contrast struck her. On one hand, she had faced literal fire. On the other, she now faced subtle, institutional resistance that could be just as deadly in its own way. She considered the young guards at the gate that morning. Their hesitation had been understandable. They had never seen her in action. They only saw a woman in civilian clothes. Yet that moment would linger, a memory of the authority she wielded effortlessly. She smiled faintly, knowing it was only the first of many lessons she would teach the base. Afghanistan had taught her patience, strategy, and resilience. Virginia would teach her diplomacy, persuasion, and how to dismantle prejudice quietly but decisively. She had walked through fire and emerged stronger. Now, she would walk through doubt and ignorance and emerge victorious. Elena prepared for her first briefing. She reviewed personnel files, base protocols, and operational reports, noting weaknesses and planning subtle interventions. She understood that leadership here would be less about battlefield heroics and more about methodical, intelligent action, and yet the principles were the same. Discipline, precision, foresight, and decisiveness were the tools she had honed in war and would now wield at home. As night fell, she stood by the window of her quarters, gazing at the sprawling base below. Lights flickered across buildings, watchtowers, and training fields. Soldiers moved in rehearsed patterns, unaware that a quiet revolution was about to begin. Elena knew that skepticism and resistance would meet her at every turn. She also knew that by the time the base truly understood her abilities, a transformation would be complete. In the dark, she thought of her platoon in Coast Pass. The fear, the adrenaline, the responsibility. She remembered how she had never let herself falter. That lesson, more than any medal or recognition, had shaped her into the commander she was today. And now, Virginia would be her new battlefield, a place where discipline, strategy, and leadership would win the day, not gunfire or luck. Elena turned from the window, her expression composed and determined. Tomorrow, she would meet with the officers, review training exercises, and begin the subtle work of reshaping the base. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she also knew this: she had faced far worse. Afghanistan had prepared her for this moment, just as every hard-won lesson had prepared her to lead with authority, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. And for the first time since her arrival, Elena felt a flicker of satisfaction. Not from recognition, not from authority, but from the knowledge that she had survived impossible circumstances before, and that nothing, not skepticism nor tradition, would stop her now. The early morning light painted the base in muted gold as Elena Walker walked through the familiar gates of the Virginia Naval Base. Everything seemed unchanged: the barracks, the drill fields, even the echo of boots on asphalt. Yet the air felt different. It carried anticipation, skepticism, and the unspoken question: who is this woman claiming authority here? Her steps were measured, deliberate. Each building she passed seemed to carry a memory, some trivial, like the smell of the mess hall, others sharp, like the long nights poring over reports as a junior officer, unheard and overlooked. She remembered being dismissed, her ideas brushed aside, her ambitions minimized simply because she was a woman. The irony wasn't lost on her now. She had returned, not as a visitor, but as the base's commanding officer. She paused outside the administration building, watching as officers and enlisted personnel moved about their duties. She noticed the subtle glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Some recognized her immediately, eyes widening with astonishment. Others stared blankly, trying to gauge whether she had the authority her badge claimed. Elena didn't rush them. Respect, she knew, was earned, not demanded. Inside, the officers' mess was buzzing with the morning chatter of coffee and routines. Conversations halted, forks paused mid-air as the whispers spread. Is that Commander Walker? Some faces held admiration, tinged with surprise. Others radiated skepticism. She acknowledged them with a polite nod, but her mind was elsewhere. She had work to do. This base was a sleeping giant, and it was her job to awaken it. Lieutenant Daniels, a young officer with a streak of arrogance, leaned toward a colleague. "She's here. The new CO. Do you think she can handle it?" His words, intended to provoke, barely registered with Elena. She had heard doubt countless times before, and every time she had let her actions respond. Words were fleeting. Results were permanent. Her first stop was the command center. She ran her hand across the polished desk, feeling the weight of history and responsibility. Charts, maps, and operational reports cluttered the room, each one a testament to past successes and failures. She began reviewing them, noting patterns, inefficiencies, and gaps in procedure. Her mind raced with strategies, reforms, and subtle changes, everything that would prepare the base for excellence. The drill yard was next. Recruits, some barely out of boot camp, struggled with their formations. Their movements were sloppy, their timing off. Elena's gaze sharpened. Discipline was not optional. She took notes quietly, observing instead of immediately correcting. She would need to rebuild the base's culture from the ground up, instilling precision, accountability, and professionalism. Her presence alone, she knew, would begin to reshape behavior, but subtle interventions would carry the real weight. Later, as she walked through the barracks, memories flooded her. She recalled late nights spent studying strategy, poring over mission reports, and observing human behavior in crisis situations. She remembered moments when her authority had been questioned, dismissed, or ignored. And she remembered the lessons Afghanistan had taught her. Patience, observation, and timing were as crucial as courage in combat. Leadership was not about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about being the most effective, the most prepared, the most unwavering. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at her door. It was Commander Reynolds, an experienced officer who had served under her predecessor. "Good morning, Commander Walker," he said, attempting politeness. "I've heard, mixed reactions from the staff. Some are concerned about changes you might implement." Elena offered a small, measured smile. "I expect questions," she replied calmly. "Change is always uncomfortable, but it is necessary. My goal isn't to disrupt for the sake of disruption. It's to prepare this base, every officer and enlisted member, for excellence." Her words were firm but composed, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Reynolds nodded slowly, impressed despite himself. She spent the afternoon meeting with department heads, reviewing schedules and identifying operational weaknesses. Each interaction was a test, for them and for her. She listened more than she spoke, absorbing information, detecting patterns, and subtly guiding discussions toward accountability and efficiency. By evening, she had a comprehensive understanding of the base's current state, capable but complacent, experienced but sometimes resistant to change. As night fell, Elena took a solitary walk along the perimeter fence. The lights cast long shadows across the training grounds, illuminating the silhouettes of soldiers running drills, practicing marksmanship, and performing maintenance checks. She observed quietly, noting both dedication and lapses. Every mistake was a lesson in human behavior, every success a reinforcement of discipline. She would need to balance correction with encouragement, authority with guidance. Her thoughts drifted again to her time in Afghanistan. She remembered a particular night when the convoy had been surrounded, gunfire tearing the air apart. Soldiers panicked, morale faltered, and every decision carried life or death consequences. In that chaos, she had learned to act decisively, to remain calm, and to trust in both strategy and her team. Those lessons were invaluable, and now they would shape the culture of her new command. Returning to her quarters, she began drafting plans for training exercises, emergency protocols, and leadership workshops. She envisioned a base where every officer and recruit understood their role, executed it flawlessly, and respected the chain of command. But she also understood that transformation would take time. Resistance, skepticism, and inertia were powerful opponents, sometimes more difficult than insurgents or ambushes. Still, she was undeterred. Elena Walker had never been intimidated by challenges, whether in a narrow mountain pass under fire or in a room full of doubtful colleagues. She knew her strength lay in preparation, strategy, and quiet authority. By the time the staff fully grasped her capabilities, it would be too late for doubt to hinder progress. Before retiring for the night, she stood by the window once more, gazing across the base. Lights flickered across buildings, watchtowers, and drill fields. Soldiers moved with purpose, though unaware of the subtle shift that had already begun under her leadership. Elena exhaled slowly, letting the weight of responsibility settle comfortably on her shoulders. This was her domain now, and she intended to mold it with the same precision and discipline that had saved lives in Afghanistan. In the quiet of the night, she felt a surge of anticipation. Challenges awaited, tests of authority, resistance from skeptics, and the slow grind of cultural change. But she was ready. Afghanistan had forged her into a leader who could navigate chaos, skepticism, and danger alike. And here, in the calm of Virginia, she would apply the same principles to shape a base that would become exemplary in every sense. Elena Walker turned from the window, her expression composed, resolute, and unwavering. Tomorrow would bring meetings, inspections, and drills. It would also bring the first subtle tests of her authority, from officers who doubted, recruits who resisted, and traditions that clung stubbornly to the past. But she had faced far worse. She had survived fire, gunfire, and betrayal. And now, with patience, strategy, and unshakable confidence, she would win the respect and loyalty of every soldier under her command. The return was not just a homecoming. It was a declaration. The base would remember Elena Walker, not as a visitor, not as a forgotten junior officer, but as a commander capable of transforming any challenge into a triumph. And by the time the staff fully understood her strength, it would be too late to resist. The next morning, the base stirred to life under a pale dawn. Soldiers moved through drill formations. Vehicles rumbled along the asphalt, and the distant hum of machinery set a rhythm to the day. Elena Walker walked among them, not in a commanding rush, but with deliberate observation. Every step, every glance, every note she took was a calculation, a strategy in motion. She was not here to assert authority through volume or intimidation. Her weapon was quiet presence, her strength measured in precision and clarity. Her first stop was the training yard. Recruits scrambled through obstacle courses, some falling short of the standards she had observed. One young man, Private Cole, struggled to complete a rope climb, grunting with exertion. Another, Sergeant Briggs, an older, confident officer, muttered under his breath at what he perceived as inefficiency. Elena noted every detail, silently cataloging performance, demeanor, and morale. She said nothing. Later, a maintenance officer ignored a safety protocol during a vehicle inspection, brushing off her subtle inquiry with a casual shrug. Elena's expression didn't change. Her eyes, calm and penetrating, recorded the incident. She didn't chastise him in public. Not yet. Leadership, she knew, was not about public humiliation. It was about observation, calculation, and timing. She would act when the impact would be undeniable. By mid-morning, she convened her first informal staff meeting. The officers assembled in a room thick with nervous energy. Elena didn't storm in, demanding respect. Instead, she quietly greeted them, acknowledged their presence, and began reviewing reports. She spoke of protocols, logistics, and training metrics, her voice measured and calm. No theatrics, no ego, just facts, analysis, and vision. As she projected data on a wall-mounted screen, detailing errors, lapses, and areas for improvement, a silence fell over the room. The officers, who had whispered and doubted moments before, could no longer ignore the clarity of her observations. Names, dates, and consequences flashed across the screen. Meticulous records she had compiled in just a few days. "This is not about blame," she said evenly. "It is about accountability. Every mission, every operation, every drill requires precision. There is no room for mistakes." The impact was immediate. Officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some nodding in reluctant acknowledgement, others processing the magnitude of what they had underestimated. Elena watched without expression, letting the weight of her quiet authority settle. She had no need for threats or aggression. The facts spoke louder than any words could. Meanwhile, Sergeant Briggs, who had openly mocked her earlier in the day, scowled at the screen. He had assumed she would be soft, that her leadership would be measured in leniency or fear of confrontation. Now he saw something different. A commander whose authority was absolute, not because she demanded it, but because it was undeniable. Her meticulous observation, her knowledge of every personnel file, every procedure, and every training metric had given her an invisible yet unassailable power. During the meeting, Elena noticed Private Cole, the young recruit struggling with the rope climb, sitting quietly in the back. He met her eyes briefly, and she gave a subtle nod of encouragement. Leadership was not just about correction. It was also about empowerment. Some would fear her authority. Others would rise to meet it. She intended to cultivate both, carefully and deliberately. After the meeting, she walked through the barracks and training areas again, noting interactions among officers, recruits, and support staff. She observed the hierarchy, the informal power structures, the murmurs of dissent, and the whispers of admiration. Leadership, she reminded herself, was a balance, guiding, correcting, observing, and knowing when to intervene. Her presence alone was already reshaping behavior. Soldiers straightened, conversations hushed, and subtle gestures of respect became visible in the way they carried themselves around her. By evening, Elena convened another informal review, this time focusing on communications and operational drills. She introduced scenarios, requesting input from officers and enlisted personnel alike. Every suggestion, every hesitation, and every mistake was quietly recorded. She interjected only when necessary, offering guidance through precise questions and strategic prompts rather than blunt instruction. The officers began to see the pattern. She led not by fear or dominance, but by intelligence, preparation, and quiet decisiveness. One officer, Lieutenant Daniels, who had been openly skeptical, finally spoke. "Ma'am, I underestimated the clarity of your planning," he admitted, his tone hesitant but sincere. Elena gave a faint smile, acknowledging the truth without triumph. She had no need for praise. Respect, she understood, would emerge naturally from results, not from words. That night, Elena returned to her quarters, exhausted but alert. She reviewed the day's notes and observations, identifying patterns of inefficiency, strengths to cultivate, and subtle resistance to address. She understood that leadership was often a slow, strategic process, not a sudden conquest. Some officers would resist, others would rise to meet her expectations, but by the time the full transformation occurred, skepticism would be replaced by loyalty, admiration, and efficiency. Her thoughts wandered again to Afghanistan. The lessons she had learned there, patience under fire, calm in chaos, decisive action, were now being applied in a different battlefield. Here, the enemy was not insurgents or gunfire, but complacency, doubt, and outdated hierarchies. And just as in the mountains of Coast Pass, she would not falter. She thought of the young guards at the gate who had questioned her authority days earlier. They had seen only a woman in casual clothes. Now, she was becoming the invisible force reshaping their environment. By the end of her tenure, she realized Even the most skeptical soldiers would come to respect her, perhaps without fully understanding why. The quiet authority she wielded, the meticulous preparation, the calm decisiveness, it was a force they could not ignore. As she finally settled into bed, the base quieted outside, soldiers drifting into sleep or late-night routines. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. Leadership, she thought, was not about being the loudest voice or the most intimidating presence. It was about presence, observation, preparation, and the subtle power of knowledge. Every decision, every correction, every quiet intervention built the foundation for authority. It could not be challenged because it was unshakable, invisible, and undeniable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, drills, inspections, tests of authority from skeptical officers, and subtle resistance from those who preferred the status quo. Elena welcomed them all. She had faced real danger in Afghanistan, made life-and-death decisions under fire, and emerged victorious. Compared to that, this battlefield of protocol, perception, and authority was a challenge she could meet with confidence, intelligence, and patience. In the stillness of her quarters, she closed her eyes and visualized the transformation she intended to create. A base operating with precision, morale high, and respect earned through competence. Officers and recruits alike performing at their highest potential, guided by clear leadership and subtle authority. It was ambitious, but achievable. And Elena Walker had never settled for less than what she could achieve. As the night deepened, she whispered to herself, almost as a promise, "This base will remember me. Not for the uniform I wear, but for the authority I wield. Not for my gender, but for my skill, my discipline, and my unwavering resolve. And when they finally understand it, they will have no choice but to respect it." With that thought, she finally allowed herself to rest, knowing that the quiet authority she had begun to establish today was only the first step in the transformation of the base and of everyone who served there. The first hints of dawn were barely brushing the horizon when the shrill wail of alarms shattered the calm of the base. Red lights flashed across the watchtowers, and the hum of vehicles and distant engines escalated into chaotic noise. Soldiers bolted from bunks and posts, some shouting orders, others fumbling with radios and gear. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire base teetered on the brink of chaos. Elena Walker emerged from her quarters within minutes, uniform crisp, posture unshaken, and eyes calm but alert. The suddenness of the crisis didn't rattle her. She had faced far worse in Afghanistan, where every second could mean life or death. Here, the stakes were different, but still critical. A security breach, whether real or simulated, demanded precision, order, and leadership. Her first glance swept the perimeter. Soldiers at various posts were panicking, some unsure whether to follow procedure or flee. She noticed two of the young gate guards from her first day, frozen and uncertain. "Move to your posts. Secure the north perimeter." She barked, her voice cutting through the noise. She didn't raise it in anger. It was simply authority made audible. The initial reports from radios were contradictory. Some posts claimed intruders, others reported system malfunctions. Elena assessed the situation instantly. Delta section, check communications lines. Alpha, lock down perimeter. Bravo, sweep the outer fence. Maintain visual on all sectors. No one leaves their post. Every command was delivered succinctly, leaving no room for confusion or hesitation. Minutes stretched into tense eternity. Soldiers moved, some stiff with fear, some sluggish with uncertainty, but Elena's calm energy rippled through them. She positioned herself in the central command center, directing the flow of information, coordinating patrols, and monitoring all reports with precision. Radios crackled with panicked voices, but she filtered the noise, listening only for what mattered. As the situation developed, it became clear This was no ordinary breach. Sensors had detected movement near the southern edge, but surveillance cameras were offline. Someone or something had managed to bypass early detection. The young guards who had blocked her entry just weeks ago now looked to her for direction, eyes wide with realization that the calm, composed woman they had once doubted was now their lifeline. Elena analyzed the movement patterns and deduced the most likely approach points. Sections Charlie and Echo reinforce eastern flank. Hold positions until visual confirmation. No engagement unless instructed. Her orders were precise, informed by both tactical knowledge and experience. She anticipated missteps, corrected them with quiet authority, and maintained complete situational control. Meanwhile, the officers who had doubted her authority earlier struggled to reconcile their preconceived notions with the reality unfolding before them. Lieutenant Daniels barked orders at a patrol team, but his tone faltered when Elena's gaze met his, unwavering and commanding. He corrected course immediately, following her strategy to the letter. Her presence alone recalibrated the chaos into order. The tension reached a peak when a minor explosion near a supply depot triggered a false alarm of an actual breach. Some soldiers panicked, running toward exits. Elena acted instantly. She grabbed a portable microphone, her voice calm but resolute. All personnel, maintain positions. This is a drill within the exercise. Assess and secure your posts. Follow protocol. No unnecessary movement. The effect was immediate. Panic subsided, replaced by disciplined focus. Minutes later, real-time surveillance confirmed no intruders. The alarms had been part of a surprise inspection from Navy intelligence. The simulated breach had tested the base's preparedness, responsiveness, and adherence to protocol. Officers and soldiers alike realized that under Elena's direction, the base had responded with remarkable efficiency. Even in a fabricated crisis, order had been maintained. The aftermath was instructive. Reports were compiled, lessons identified, and recommendations made. Every officer and soldier involved was debriefed. The young gate guards who had once questioned her authority now approached her nervously, eyes wide with newfound respect. "Commander Walker, we followed your instructions." "Successfully," one stammered. Elena nodded subtly, acknowledging their effort without overt praise. Respect, she knew, was earned in action, not words. Admirals and inspectors arrived later that morning to review the incident. They were unaware that the chaos had been part of a controlled drill, yet they were impressed by the base's apparent efficiency and discipline under her command. The debriefing revealed only one fact. The base had functioned flawlessly, and leadership had been decisive. Elena walked through the training grounds later that day, observing soldiers resuming routine drills with renewed confidence. The subtle changes in posture, attention, and focus did not go unnoticed. The base was already beginning to feel the impact of her presence, not through intimidation, but through competence, decisiveness, and calm authority. Even Sergeant Briggs, who had openly mocked her earlier in the month, now approached her cautiously. "Ma'am, your handling of the exercise." "It was exceptional," he admitted, almost reluctantly. Elena met his gaze evenly, offering a faint nod. She didn't need his praise. The acknowledgement of her ability, however grudging, marked a turning point. Resistance was beginning to give way to respect. Later that evening, she convened a review with key officers to analyze the simulated crisis. Every lapse, every decision, every successful action was discussed with precision. Lessons were extracted, responsibilities assigned, and corrective actions mandated. Her approach was neither punitive nor condescending. It was methodical, intelligent, and authoritative. By the end of the meeting, the officers understood a clear truth. Elena Walker was not a commander to be underestimated. As she returned to her quarters, she reflected on the morning's events. A crisis, whether real or simulated, revealed more than just operational readiness. It revealed character, leadership, and the ability to maintain composure under pressure. She had proven, both to herself and the base, that authority earned through competence and calm decisiveness commanded far more loyalty than rank alone. Night settled over the base, and soldiers prepared for the quiet hours. Elena walked along the perimeter, observing the watch shifts, the patrols, and the drills. Every movement, every posture, every glance reflected a subtle shift, a newfound awareness of competence, order, and command. The base had learned a crucial lesson. Leadership was not a matter of intimidation or force. It was precision, clarity, and unwavering authority. Her thoughts drifted back to Afghanistan, to the ambush that had tested her resolve and judgment. The stakes had been life and death then. The stakes were different now, but the principles remained the same. Calm observation, decisive action, and unshakable confidence. Those were the tools of leadership, whether in a dusty mountain pass or a sprawling naval base. Elena Walker knew this was only the beginning. The crisis had demonstrated her capability, but it had also revealed gaps, weaknesses, and opportunities for growth. She would address each one, systematically and strategically, until every officer, every recruit, and every guard understood the authority she wielded, not through fear, but through respect and proven competence. Finally, as she retired to her quarters, the night quieted outside. The lights of the base shimmered softly against the darkened sky, a symbol of stability restored. Elena sat at her desk, reviewing notes and preparing for the challenges yet to come. The crisis had tested her leadership and emerged with clarity. She was the commander this base needed, capable of guiding it through any challenge, anticipated or unforeseen. And as she gazed out the window one last time that night, she felt a rare satisfaction. Today had been a trial, a measure of authority, and a declaration of capability. The base had responded, disciplined, coordinated, and efficient under her guidance. Elena Walker, who had once been underestimated and overlooked, had proven that true leadership was silent, steady, and unyielding, and the base would never forget it. The morning light slanted sharply across the base as Elena Walker walked toward the officers' mess. It had been 6 weeks since her arrival, and the subtle shifts in attitude she had begun to instill were now becoming more visible. Recruits moved with greater precision. Guards carried themselves with confidence. Yet, beneath the surface, resistance still lingered. Some officers clung to old hierarchies and outdated traditions. Their whispers carried skepticism about her methods, her reforms, and most insidiously, her gender. Captain Briggs, a senior officer with years of tenure under his belt, had emerged as the loudest critic. He openly mocked Elena's insistence on mental health programs, equal standards in training, and stricter accountability protocols. Soft leadership, he sneered during a briefing, won't prepare these soldiers for real operations. His words were meant to provoke, to undermine her authority, and to rally support among those who still doubted her. Elena didn't respond immediately. She had learned patience in the crucible of Afghanistan, where impulsive decisions could cost lives. Leadership, she understood, required timing. She let Briggs speak, recording every misstep, every lapse in logic, every instance of negligence. Her strategy was quiet but unrelenting. Allow resistance to expose itself, then dismantle it with precise, undeniable evidence. The opportunity came during a routine training exercise. Briggs, confident in his knowledge and skeptical of Elena's directives, failed to follow proper safety protocols. A mock artillery simulation was improperly coordinated, putting recruits at unnecessary risk. Elena observed silently, her eyes calm but alert, cataloging every detail. She didn't interrupt mid-exercise. She allowed the consequences of negligence to reveal themselves naturally. After the exercise, she convened a formal review. Every misstep was documented. Evidence of failure, lapses in procedure, and potential risks was presented with precision. "Captain Briggs," she began evenly, "these protocols exist to ensure safety and efficiency. Deviating from them endangers lives and compromises readiness. Your actions today demonstrate a clear failure to adhere to established standards." She let her words hang in the room, steady and unflinching. The officers watched closely as Briggs sputtered, caught between defense and embarrassment. Elena's quiet authority left no space for argument. Her documentation, her meticulous observation, and her calm precision had created an unassailable case. The reprimand was professional, measured, and final. Briggs was reassigned to a secondary role temporarily, a clear message that negligence and resistance would not be tolerated. The ripple effect was immediate. Whispers of skepticism diminished, replaced by cautious respect. Officers who had observed Briggs' reassignment understood that Elena's authority was not a suggestion. It was an absolute. Leadership, she demonstrated, was not about intimidation or confrontation, but about competence, foresight, and strategic intervention. Her actions spoke louder than any verbal command. Elena moved on to her broader reforms. She implemented structured mental health programs, ensuring that every soldier had access to support. She introduced equal standards across all training exercises, ensuring that ability, not gender or seniority, determined performance expectations. Slowly but surely, the base began to shift. Morale improved, efficiency increased, and a culture of accountability began to replace complacency. Recruits, once hesitant and unsure, now approached her with a mix of respect and curiosity. She encouraged initiative, rewarded competence, and corrected errors without personal judgment. The base, once stagnant in its routines, began to thrive under her strategic leadership. Soldiers moved with purpose, officers collaborated with renewed focus, and even the formerly resistant senior staff began to acknowledge her methods. One afternoon, a young sergeant approached Elena hesitantly. "Ma'am, I wanted to say thank you," he said. "The training, it actually makes sense now. I feel capable." Elena nodded, her smile subtle but genuine. Empowerment, she knew, was just as important as discipline. Respect was earned not just through authority, but by enabling others to perform at their highest potential. Even Captain Briggs, observing from the sidelines, could not deny the change. His open skepticism had been replaced by grudging acknowledgement of Elena's effectiveness. He no longer mocked her directives openly. Instead, he complied, knowing that resistance was futile against competence backed by strategy and evidence. The culture of resistance, once pervasive, was giving way to a new order, quiet, disciplined, and unwavering. Elena's strategic interventions extended beyond personnel. She audited operational protocols, logistics chains, and emergency procedures. Inefficiencies were corrected, redundancies eliminated, and processes streamlined. Every reform was implemented methodically, backed by evidence and executed without drama. Slowly, the base began to resemble the model she had envisioned, disciplined, efficient, and prepared for any challenge. By the end of the month, the transformation was undeniable. Officers who had doubted her authority now sought her guidance. Recruits approached training with confidence and focus. Guards carried themselves with newfound pride, and the atmosphere of skepticism that had greeted her arrival had dissipated. Leadership, Elena demonstrated, was not a matter of asserting power through intimidation or fear. It was about competence, preparation, and the ability to effect tangible results. As she walked through the base one evening, Elena observed subtle signs of change. Soldiers moved with precision. Officers collaborated rather than argued. Even the young guards who had once blocked her entry now greeted her with crisp salutes and genuine attention. The base, once resistant and skeptical, had begun to internalize her principles of discipline, accountability, and competence. Her reflection returned to Afghanistan. The ambush, the chaos, the split-second decisions, those experiences had shaped her into a leader capable of navigating resistance, uncertainty, and high stakes. The base, though not under fire, presented a similar challenge: human behavior, entrenched habits, and skepticism. And just as she had succeeded in the mountains, she was succeeding here, quietly but decisively, one calculated action at a time. In the quiet of her quarters that night, she reviewed notes and observations from the day. Every challenge met, every resistance addressed, every reform implemented was a step toward the transformation she had envisioned. Leadership, she knew, was not about immediate gratification or recognition. It was about consistent, strategic action, patience, and the ability to influence others subtly but effectively. Elena Walker had begun the process of reshaping not just the procedures and policies of the base, but its culture, its morale, and its identity. Resistance, skepticism, and complacency were natural. They were obstacles to be understood, measured, and addressed. And under her quiet, strategic authority, they were being dismantled. As she looked out across the perimeter that night, the base lights shimmering against the darkened sky, Elena felt a quiet satisfaction. Change had begun. Authority had been asserted not through intimidation, but through competence, preparation, and results. The foundation had been laid for a disciplined, efficient, and cohesive base, one that would thrive under her leadership long after this first phase of transformation. Her journey was far from over. Resistance would continue to emerge, new challenges would test her resolve, and skeptics would seek to undermine her authority. But she was ready. Elena Walker had survived war, chaos, and skepticism before. Now, in the quiet, methodical dismantling of resistance at home, she was proving that leadership was not a matter of fear, but of competence, strategy, and unwavering resolve. Weeks had passed since Elena Walker had first walked through the gates of the Virginia Naval Base, and the transformation she had orchestrated was no longer subtle. Every corner of the sprawling compound bore the mark of her leadership. Drill routines flowed with precision, communication chains functioned seamlessly, and morale was palpably higher. Yet there remained one final, intangible obstacle: the full recognition of her authority by every officer and recruit, including those who had doubted her from the very beginning. The day began with a crisp autumn breeze. Elena moved through the base's training grounds, observing the morning drill with her usual calm, deliberate pace. Recruits snapped to attention at her presence. Officers briefed her on progress without hesitation. And even the young guards who had initially blocked her entry now followed her instructions with precise efficiency. The silent authority she had cultivated over months was now visible in posture, movement, and obedience. Her eyes caught sight of Lieutenant Daniels, previously one of her more vocal skeptics, supervising a complex tactical exercise with meticulous accuracy. His team executed each maneuver flawlessly, the result of Elena's subtle guidance and insistence on precision. He noticed her watching and offered a tight, respectful nod. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried immense weight, the first public acknowledgement from a former doubter that her leadership was unquestionable. Elena's mind shifted to the gate guards, those who had once dared to tell her, "Mom, you can't enter." She remembered the mix of doubt and hesitation on their faces. Today, however, they stood alert and confident, watching her pass with disciplined attention. Their transformation, while smaller in scale, was symbolic. They had moved from disbelief to respect, a microcosm of the larger shift she had achieved across the base. Later that morning, she called a formal assembly in the main parade ground. The entire base personnel were present, standing in precise formations under the crisp morning sun. Elena stepped onto the podium, her uniform immaculate, her posture commanding but composed. The whispers and hesitant glances she had once noticed were replaced by a quiet, expectant attention. Officers straightened, recruits shifted their stance to match the new level of discipline, and guards at the perimeter watched from afar, their expressions respectful. Elena began with a review of the base's progress. She spoke of operational improvements, efficiency gains, and the successes of training exercises over the past months. Her tone was factual, precise, and calm, emphasizing results rather than accolades. As she spoke, she noticed the subtle changes in the audience, nods of acknowledgement, focused attention, and for the first time, visible pride in their collective accomplishments under her guidance. Then came the pivotal moment. She addressed the young guards directly, those who had once questioned her right to enter. "You have all demonstrated growth, discipline, and commitment to duty," she said evenly. "Leadership is not about age, rank, or preconceived notions. It is earned through preparation, performance, and respect for the chain of command. Today, you exemplify that principle." A murmur of acknowledgement passed through the formation. One of the guards, a young man named Private Hayes, stepped forward, eyes fixed on Elena. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. We recognize your command. We salute you." It was a small gesture, but it carried monumental significance. The salute, once withheld in doubt and disbelief, now symbolized full recognition of Elena's authority. A ripple of movement followed. Other guards, and then officers, gradually raised their hands in formal salute, the precise military gesture that had eluded her on the first day. One by one, every individual present acknowledged her as the undisputed commander. Elena returned the salute with quiet dignity, her expression composed but resolute. In that moment, the base shifted from a collection of individuals to a unified entity, bound by discipline, respect, and the subtle yet unshakable authority she had cultivated over months of observation, guidance, and strategic intervention. The scene, though formal and procedural, felt deeply emotional, a silent acknowledgement of her journey, her perseverance, and her leadership. After the ceremony, she moved through the formations, offering brief words of encouragement, checking in with officers and recruits alike. Each interaction reinforced the principles she had instilled: accountability, precision, discipline, and respect earned through competence. She noticed the previously resistant officers now cooperating seamlessly, their skepticism replaced by professional acknowledgement of her strategic methods. That afternoon, she convened a planning session with senior officers. With the symbolic acknowledgement complete, she shifted the focus to future operations, improvements, and continued excellence. Maps, drills, and logistical strategies were reviewed in meticulous detail. The officers, now fully aware of her command, participated actively, offering input and suggestions. The dynamic had shifted, from resistance to collaboration, from doubt to productive engagement. Even Captain Briggs, her most vocal skeptic, attended with quiet attentiveness. He contributed to the discussion with measured respect, occasionally glancing at Elena for guidance before making critical recommendations. His transformation was perhaps the clearest sign of her success. A former doubter had become a willing participant in the new culture she had forged. By evening, Elena walked alone along the perimeter, reflecting on the journey. The base was transformed, not just in procedure, but in spirit. Discipline, respect, and unity now permeated every corner. Officers and recruits alike had internalized the lessons she had imparted, not through force, intimidation, or theatrical displays, but through competence, preparation, and subtle, steady authority. Her thoughts drifted to her experiences in Afghanistan, the ambushes, the split-second decisions, and the lives saved through calm leadership. Those lessons had shaped her, forging the principles she now applied in this different kind of battlefield. Authority, she realized, was not about asserting dominance. It was about earning recognition through consistency, intelligence, and integrity. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the parade grounds, Elena stopped at the gate where the first confrontation had occurred. She looked at the guards standing vigil, now disciplined, confident, and respectful. She remembered their initial doubts, their hesitation, and the subtle challenge they had presented. Now they were allies, symbols of the transformation she had achieved. In that quiet moment, she felt a profound sense of completion. The symbolic salute was more than a gesture. It was the culmination of months of effort, strategy, and resilience. It represented the acknowledgement of her authority, the acceptance of her leadership, and the beginning of a legacy she had worked tirelessly to establish. Elena Walker knew that leadership was a continuous process, that challenges would continue to arise, and that vigilance and strategy would always be required. Yet, for the first time since her arrival, she could feel the full weight of her authority, recognized, respected, and internalized across the base. The foundations she had laid were solid, the culture she had nurtured was thriving, and the personnel under her command were united in purpose and discipline. As night fell and the base settled into its routines, Elena allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The journey from doubt to respect, from skepticism to acknowledgement, had reached a milestone. The symbolic salute, once withheld in disbelief, had been granted in full recognition. She had turned resistance into respect, hesitation into discipline, and doubt into unwavering loyalty. And as she stood there, alone yet surrounded by the silent, watchful presence of her transformed base, she knew one undeniable truth. She had arrived not merely as a commander, but as a leader whose authority, earned through patience, precision, and unwavering resolve, would endure long after this day. The base awoke to another crisp morning, but the atmosphere was markedly different from Elena Walker's first day. There was a quiet efficiency, a subtle energy that permeated every corner, from the drill yards to the watchtowers, from the barracks to the administration building. The soldiers moved with precision, officers coordinated seamlessly, and even the youngest recruits carried themselves with confidence and purpose. This was the culture Elena had envisioned, nurtured, and enforced over months of unwavering leadership. Elena herself walked through the parade grounds, observing with the calm, deliberate scrutiny that had become her trademark. Today, however, there was a new layer to her presence, a recognition not just of authority, but of respect. The guards who had once blocked her entry now saluted instinctively, their eyes reflecting genuine acknowledgement. Officers straightened without hesitation, and recruits executed commands with precision and focus. The subtle, silent authority she had cultivated had become institutionalized, visible, tangible, and enduring. The morning briefing was held outdoors, with the base's full complement of officers and senior enlisted personnel in attendance. Elena spoke of operational readiness, training schedules, and upcoming exercises, but the tone was different from her early days. Her words carried authority, yes, but also vision. She emphasized collaboration, continuous improvement, and professional growth. This was no longer about establishing control. It was about inspiring excellence and ensuring the base thrived under shared responsibility. Lieutenant Daniels, once skeptical, now presented operational insights with confidence, his voice steady and respectful. Captain Briggs, too, contributed thoughtfully, offering measured suggestions and acknowledging the improvements Elena had instituted. The officers, once resistant, were now fully engaged, their professional respect for Elena undeniable. She observed them with quiet satisfaction. The resistance had been transformed into collaboration, skepticism into trust, and hesitation into initiative. After the briefing, Elena moved to the training grounds, where recruits were engaged in a complex tactical exercise. She watched as small teams communicated efficiently, adapted to changing scenarios, and executed maneuvers with precision. The lessons she had instilled, discipline, observation, teamwork, and accountability, were now second nature. She recognized some of the young guards from her first day, now fully integrated into the operational flow. Their growth symbolized the broader transformation. Belief replaced doubt, competence replaced hesitation, and loyalty replaced resistance. Later, in a formal ceremony, Elena addressed the entire base. She spoke not as a commander demanding obedience, but as a leader acknowledging achievement. "This base has undergone a transformation," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "It has adapted to higher standards, embraced accountability, and demonstrated that excellence is not optional, but expected. Each of you has contributed to this change. Respect, discipline, and professionalism are no longer abstract ideals. They are the foundation of who we are as a team." The crowd listened intently, absorbing her words not as orders, but as affirmation. Officers nodded in agreement. Recruits absorbed the lessons in silence, and even the youngest soldiers understood the weight of her message. Elena had not merely imposed authority. She had cultivated it, demonstrated it, and inspired it in every individual under her command. After the ceremony, she conducted a personal walkthrough of the base, engaging with individuals at every level. She spoke to recruits about the importance of integrity and initiative, encouraged officers to pursue continuous improvement, and commended guards for their vigilance and attention to detail. Every interaction reinforced the culture she had meticulously built. Each soldier, officer, and recruit could see that Elena's authority was rooted not in rank alone, but in competence, fairness, and unshakable resolve. Even the previously resistant officers approached her differently now. Captain Briggs, for example, quietly observed her interactions with the soldiers, occasionally nodding in approval. He no longer challenged her directives, but worked proactively to support her initiatives. Elena recognized this as a sign of lasting change. Skepticism had been replaced with respect and commitment to shared goals. As the day progressed, she walked alone to the perimeter fence, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the day she had first arrived, blocked by the gate guards, underestimated by officers, and dismissed by peers. Every challenge she had faced, from internal resistance to operational inefficiencies, had tested her patience, judgment, and resolve. Yet, through strategy, observation, and unwavering authority, she had not only overcome skepticism, but transformed the base into a model of discipline and competence. Her thoughts turned inward to the lessons she had carried from Afghanistan, the necessity of calm in crisis, the power of strategic action, and the importance of earning respect through competence rather than fear. These principles had guided her throughout her tenure here, shaping every decision, every intervention, and every subtle correction. They had allowed her to turn doubt into loyalty, resistance into respect, and hesitation into initiative. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she observed the base in quiet reflection. Soldiers returned from drills, officers completed reports, and the subtle rhythm of duty resumed. The transformation she had initiated was now self-sustaining. The culture of excellence, discipline, and respect would endure beyond her immediate presence. The symbolic gestures, the salutes, the acknowledgement of authority, the compliance with procedures, were now internalized values rather than enforced behaviors. Elena understood that her leadership legacy would not be measured solely by operational metrics or efficiency gains, but by the character of the personnel she had shaped. The base would continue to thrive, guided by the principles she had instilled long after she moved on. She had arrived as an outsider, challenged by doubt and resistance, and left as a leader whose authority, competence, and integrity had reshaped the very identity of the base. As night settled over the base, Elena walked to the center of the parade ground. The stars reflected softly on the polished surfaces of vehicles, drills, and watchtowers. She paused, allowing herself a rare moment of quiet pride. The journey from being blocked at the gate to commanding full respect and recognition had been arduous, challenging, and profoundly rewarding. Every officer, recruit, and guard had played a part, yet her vision and strategic leadership had been the catalyst. She knew that future challenges would arise, crises, personnel changes, operational demands, but the foundation she had built was resilient. The base was now a living testament to disciplined leadership, strategic authority, and the quiet power of competence. Every soldier who now saluted her did so not out of fear or obligation, but from respect, trust, and acknowledgement of her skill and judgment. Finally, Helena Walker turned toward the gates, the path she had first struggled to enter, now illuminated by the glow of evening lights. She thought of the young guards who had doubted her, the skeptical officers, and the recruits who had struggled with discipline. Each of them had been transformed by her leadership, and through them, her legacy would endure. As she walked back toward her quarters, she reflected on the journey that had defined her command, the challenges, the resistance, the crises, and the eventual recognition. She understood that leadership was more than authority. It was patience, strategy, observation, and the ability to inspire competence and respect in others. Her tenure had not just changed procedures, it had changed people, culture, and identity. Elena Walker knew that her story would be remembered here, long after she left. The woman once blocked at the gate, underestimated by many, who became the commander capable of transforming a base through quiet authority, strategic insight, and unwavering resolve. She had not only earned their respect, she had earned their trust, loyalty, and admiration. The base was quiet now, disciplined, and ready for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Alana stood at the center of it all, a commander not only in rank, but in capability, vision, and integrity. The journey from skepticism to recognition was complete, but the legacy she had built would endure, shaping every soldier, officer, and recruit who walked these grounds for years to come. And in the stillness of that night, Alana Walker allowed herself a faint smile. She had arrived to a chorus of doubt and disbelief, and now she left behind a symphony of respect, discipline, and excellence, a legacy of command that would not be forgotten.